What are the fundamental values the Green Party seeks to uphold in its economic policy?
Well, basically there are four main areas that the whole idea of green economics has tried to address. The first is that it's ecological sustainability. The second is equity and social justice. The third is devolution and decentralization. And the fourth centers on the whole idea of self-reliance, but interdependence. Now, you can see those are four main areas. Now, the sustainability becomes quite crucial, because without that, the world is just going to grind itself to a halt. The standard economics ideas is that you generate external growth on the idea of producing more and more and more. That simply won't work. Not only will it not work, it's going to kill us off as a human race, and indeed as the way the world goes. Our abuse of resources is now accepted as fact. Remember, we've been talking about this since 1973, so I was really pleased that others have begun to think about this. But of course, that's only one side of what for us is a four-sided story. Equity is quite crucial, because you can talk until you're blue in the face about how many green trees and save the whales you want. If people are starving, then their whole idea is not going to centre on how wonderful the trees are. They're going to burn those trees down. They're going to burn those down in order to get food, in order to have firewood, in order to have all sorts of things. So therefore, we must address equity and social justice. We must give people basic human rights and fundamental freedoms, and that's what the Green Party is about in economics terms as well. That's a problem only if you still have people controlling things from the middle and telling other people what's best for them. We have to give people power. We have to empower people. We have to give decision-making to the lowest possible central place, the lowest possible place where people are. And that's what the Green Party is about in terms of decentralization and devolution, giving people rights over their own lives. We then have to think about, well, why are we doing all of this? What's the whole point? We want to ensure that people can stand on their own 2 feet. We want them to be self-reliant. Having said that, we don't want them to be isolated. We don't want them to be completely on their own. We want to create a sense of interdependence. And that's going to avoid this idea that I'm going to have a bigger stick than you to beat you over the head to get what you've got. We still must make ourselves interdependent, but self-reliant. Those are the 4 basic tenets, and everything else then flows from that.
That's excellent, thank you. What are the main green philosophical objections to the free market ideology?
Well, our biggest problem, of course, is that there's an awful lot of waffle that's come into this whole idea of what free market is. I mean, it isn't a free market. The woman in Wigan who's got no money, who lives living on a pension, doesn't have any access to a free market. The single-parent family in Hackney doesn't have access to a free market. It's only free to those who have access to the market. So what we're saying is that it is a basic misnomer. It is a basic fundamental fault. It is flawed. But it's all hidden behind this wonderful smokescreen of laissez-faire, of let them all eat cake, and other phrases that people come out with. What the Green Party is saying is that we want to create a genuine market of quality of life, that everybody has access to the main things like clean air, clear water, good food, open and honest shelter, access to education, genuine health, not sort of some sort of way of paying for tablets that you want, but proper health, in other words, preventative health care. And the idea to be able to mix freely with your peers and others, and to have access to a spiritual life. Those are the fundamental freedoms that the Green Party stands for. That's the free market that we want to generate. Other things, I'm afraid, will stop those happening.
Thank you. What are the main green economic objections to the free market ideology?
As I've already mentioned, I mean, the main problem is that it isn't a free market. But the ideology centres on a myth. The myth that people have open rights to choose, and all you need to do is to give them rights to that choice, and they can carry on choosing things in a wonderful, free and open way. That's absolute waffle. There has never been a totally free and open market in this country. There's been manipulation of this since time began, since the whole concept of economics was developed. And let's, I suppose, at this stage, remind ourselves there are about as many economists in the world as there are people, I would suggest, and every one of them's got their own pet idea as to what should happen. What the Green Party has tried to do is to go back a little bit, to go back down to the fundamentals, and to say that we have to create a way that people in the world are living at one with the world around them. That's the basic idea. The idea is that you give people the way of saying that their actions has a direct action upon the world around them. The environment is not something that we live apart from. It is fundamental to us and us to it. If the environment is sick, then by God we're going to become sick. So what our economics does is draw the links together, and we start to go into things like true economic costing. Instead of saying that I'm going to produce a good, let's say nuclear power, and in this country it is cheap, we are told. Now, of course, as many now people realise, that's been waffle right from the beginning. It isn't cheap. What the Green Party says, and this is a nice way of explaining in as a small example the whole way of green economics, what the Green Party says is that nuclear power, if it were to be allowed to happen, as indeed is the case in this country, let's look at its full environmental cost as well as its economic cost. Let's include within the concept of economic cost environmental costing. So, getting the stuff that creates this in the first place, the uranium out of Namibia, has killed already 10,000 people in Namibia. That cost must be included. Transporting it threatens lives and can kill the people transporting it in terms of radiation and so on. That must be included in the cost. The safety in this country, the human rights, I don't know how many people appreciate that. For example, we have a nuclear police force in this country that have a right, who are armed all the time by the way, and have a right to shoot on sight. Set up, would you believe, by Tony Benn when he was Minister of Energy, but he was, I'm afraid, misled by his civil servants at the time. But that's the sort of thing that must be built into the costs. When we add all of those things together, and then as well the opportunity cost of not doing things like insulating, of not doing things like solar power, of not having passive solar heating and things like that, we add all that in, and then we begin to see what the true cost is. And people obviously would then say, I'm sorry, we will never have nuclear power, because the real cost to us as people is too much to bear. Road building is another classic example of that, and I could take you down the road of showing that that's the way that green economics works as a fundamental, as opposed to so-called free market economics. We want the true, honest costs to be put into the equation so people are better informed to make better decisions. And we believe that what will happen is that people would make decisions on the basis of common sense, which is what we see green economics about. It's the economics of common sense.
Thank you. Well, I'd say to some extent we've already answered this, but I'll just ask it again. What would you say are the main environmental problems created by the operations of capitalism?
Well, the main is that the main problem is that the environment doesn't figure. That's the bottom line. The environment doesn't figure. It is not part of the equation. We will have a situation where people will say, well, one of the major chains needs to have good kitchen furniture. That kitchen furniture must compete with others, so they will buy in their goods from the cheapest possible supplier in pounds and pence, not in environmental costs, and we'll discover that the wood came from a section of the rainforest that has now been clear felled. That is not green economics. That is bizarre economics that centres on the quick buck. Green economics is not about the quick buck. What green economics is about, and what our approach to it as a Green Party is about, is giving people the best possible quality of life at the lowest environmental cost. And what we actually believe, and we can back this up with policies that dot I's and cross T's and pages of well thought through ideas, and policy steps to get us on this wonderful road to nirvana. What we believe is that if you actually accept the concept and the tenets of green economics, then in fact the overall benefit to mankind would be enormous, that we would be living at peace with each other, because that's the problem. When you're fighting for resources, there ain't no peace. Look at the recent Gulf War, and look at what we believe will be the next one, which is the water war, because that's going to be a big problem, particularly in the Middle East. But people will live at peace with each other, they will have equity, they will have a fair distribution of wealth, and the quality of their life will be improved. Those are the basic tenets.
Thank you. What would you say to the free market view that environmental problems can best be solved by the extension of property rights on the grounds that people will ensure that their own property does not suffer pollution?
It's a wonderful, I suppose, that's embodied best by Nicholas Ridley, dare I say.
Can you just sort of, as it were, repeat, as it were,
the idea that somehow a property-owning proletariat, dare I use those sort of words, would in some way ensure that, for example, pollution wouldn't happen. They'd protect their own rights, their own bit, is best epitomised, I think, or the flaw in that argument is best epitomised by somebody like Nicholas Ridley. He was the chap who said we should have wonderful, as Department of Environment now, when he was fronting the Department of the Environment. What he suggested was there should be all of this building taking place in the south of England because people needed homes, and where he was, in the north where he lived, and they planned on building stuff next to him. Oh no, he was the first person to complain against the idea that something should take place near me. It's okay when it's on somebody else's doorstep, but don't put it on my doorstep. That's not what the Green Party is about, and that's where the fundamental flaw takes place. But there's also a myth that somehow pollution, in its widest sense, or indeed, let's face it, in its very specific sense, however people want to define it, somehow is a respecter of boundaries. This is my country boundary. I shall be pollution-free. But next door, doesn't matter to that. This is our country. We'll block it off. There'll be no pollution here. We'll stop it. Well, of course, pollution knows no boundaries. Chernobyl, and indeed, as we talk at the moment, there's been yet another release from Chernobyl showing yet again that despite the best attempts to create a safe working environment at Chernobyl, no, the pollution is there. When we look at acid rain and the way that Britain, for example, has produced more rubbish into the environment, and Britain, remember how small Britain is with its population, than the whole of the Indian subcontinent. And yet we talk about somehow as if, I don't know, chopping down rainforests and so on is a problem of the third world, and they've got to sort it out, that population explosion is a problem of the third world. It is a clear example that a property-owning proletariat, that saying these are the boundaries and I will stick with those and I will look after those myself, just simply wouldn't work. Pollution doesn't work that way, and indeed, dare I say, people don't work that way, because if they found a way of making a quick buck somewhere else, I'm afraid it might just happen. We have to have a much better sense of setting priorities in the economy and creating a situation of sticks and carrots, of saying that we will encourage you to do this type of activity, and if you do the other type of activity, we will stop you doing it in some way.
Okay, thank you. What are the principal economic measures the Greens seek to carry out as a part of their policy?
The Green Party believes that you can't force somebody honestly to do something that they don't want to do. So what we would do first is ensure that the whole idea of information is available to everybody. And they need to have information. I mean information in economics terms now, because that's what we're talking about. People need to know the true costs of their own impact on their environment. They need to know the true costs of their purchasing decisions. People need to know what it means to buy a cheap import from Eastern Europe, and what it means to try to develop a more self-reliant home economy. They need to know those sort of information. What we actually believe is once they begin to know that and they begin to realise that, then logically they'll make the right decisions in terms of generating and supporting a much more green economy. But we need to do that. We need therefore to have quite fundamental education processes running right through society from the earliest days onwards, so people are aware of the impacts that they make. And so what you're beginning to see is, in fact, green economics isn't something that just stands alone, a bolt-on extra to something. Green economics is linked absolutely side by side, symbiotically, with our philosophy and our politics. And I'm afraid that's one of the things you'll discover with the Green Party throughout, that we don't have bolt-on little extras that will try and solve this particular problem. What we do have is linked policies and linked philosophies that ensure the whole thing sticks together. In terms of the tools that we would use to bring this about in economics terms, we would operate quite obviously in the standard marketplace of fiscal policies. So we will have policies, for example, to discourage polluting activities and to encourage non-polluting activities. We will have policies to encourage environmentally friendly and friendlier processes and discourage others. In terms of human rights, we will have tax incentives for companies that involve their workers in the decision-making process, and we will have disincentives for those that don't. We will have incentives to cut down the size of a company. That the bigger a company gets, the more costs it has in terms of trying to generate policing itself, let alone anything else. The more slack it can afford to carry in terms of inefficient ways of working. And of course, the less any one part of that organisation feels a part of it. It's the small cog in the big wheel problem. What the Green Party would do is encourage smaller companies. What we would also do, though, and this is quite crucial, and this is where we've had some very real successes over the last few years, is we would point out that we are not alone on this planet in terms of Great Britain or the British, or indeed quite often the English, that in fact we are part of a much wider community, and we must work together with that community to have a sensible economic structure that's going to encourage people to work together. Let's stop for the moment. We've got an aeroplane going over, and you're going to get this. Sorry about this. I'll try and repeat that bit. You'll have to edit it out.
Just the very end. It was the don't forget to.
Yeah. Go away. Are you picking up the sound all right? Am I talking at a suitable pitch? Okay. Get out. Has that disappeared off enough now? No. All right. One fundamental about green economics is that we have to recognise that we're not alone. That the Green Party has had some successes in this over the last few years, where we've linked with our sister parties right around the world. And I remind you, of course, that we have representation at national and international parliamentary levels right around the world. As a little aside, a little irony, it was easier to get a Green representative to the Russian Parliament than it was for the British Parliament, the so-called mother of democracies. What the Green Party would do is draw the links with international economics. So what we would be doing in Britain's case, for example, is to stop this crazy bipartisan, bilateral agreement process that we go through with countries, particularly third world countries, which is, for example, we'll buy your coffee if you buy our arms type processes, but also we will lend you money provided you pay the interest rates. What the Green Party did quite some time ago is to set up a thing called the Other Economic Summit, now known as TOES, which is a major contributor to world debate on economics issues. And it has pointed out that one of the major threats to world peace and world stability at the moment is the debt crisis. Now, it's always called the third world debt crisis, as if somehow the third world is in our debt. Well, the reality is, in terms of flows of money, there is more money flowing from the third world to the rich world than ever there is flowing from the rich world out. But what is flowing out is emissions, CO2 emissions particularly, from the rich world. That the rich, small percentage of the world pollutes the globe as a whole far more than ever does the whole of the third world with whatever population growth they might have. So what we would be doing is changing that economic linking from being that bilateral process of cash crops and debt and so on into a self-reliance interdependence, which remember was one of our 4 tenets of green economics. We would ensure that people have the rights to develop their own economies and in a way that was in harmony with the world around them. So we have our basic economics at home and how we would change things fiscally to make things much more green. We have our regional economics, our international economics, as well as the national economics. Those are the 4 areas that the Greens would try to address, and we have policies to do that.
That's great. Okay, thank you. What would an ideal green world be like?
An ideal green world, what would it be like? I have a bit of a wry smile at that, because it's something that I think all of us in the green movement keep going towards. Each of us has this idea of what a green world is, and it's very difficult to decide on what on earth that is. For me, I suppose, it's a world where people have access to the basic necessities of life without a fight. Access to clean air, access to clean water, access to good, wholesome food and enough of it, access to good shelter, open access to broad education as if people mattered. That the idea that they can live in a healthy world and have preventative health care absolutely free at the point of delivery. Not this wonderful idea that we'll spend thousands of pounds on open heart surgery, very important as it is for the person getting the open heart surgery, but what does that do for the person who's starving in the third world? Let's get our priorities right. We would have a world where people had a sense of community and an ability to relate to that community and feel that they were a part of it. And a free and open access to what they see as their form of spirituality. Because we do think that life isn't just about bread and cakes, that life is about how we work with each other and how we relate to the world around us and its spirit. We do feel that that's important. However you define what your God is, that we feel it's important that people have that right. So that's what I would see as what would happen. In terms of what wouldn't happen in a green world, we would not have nuclear power. We would not have nuclear weapons. We would not have poverty. We would not have a situation where, at the height of the Gulf War, the British people were contributing £100 every 30 seconds to a Gulf initiative when we had 70,000 young people homeless on the streets of London. We would not have that stupid situation where the haves and the have-nots are in such stark contrast. We would also have a sense of wonder at the world around us that's often lost. There's a divorcing from our roots, our humanity, and we want to make sure that people are aware of that. We're not going to turn everybody into farmers and go back to the land. I, for one, wouldn't want to do that, and many wouldn't want to do that. What we're going to do is to make the links closer. We're not going to have situations where, let's pick an example in Britain again, somebody will grow food in Cornwall, truck it to the main wholesale place in London, Spitalfields, to sell it to a retailer who will truck it back to Cornwall to sell it. I mean, where's the sense? I mean, firstly, that's not very good for the food, but it's no good for the environment. There's no sense of certainty where it comes from. We don't want young children saying that milk comes from bottles. We want them to realise that it comes from a cow, and a cow who's often kept in the most appalling circumstances in order for us to get, quotes, cheap milk. What we want is people to realise the true costs of those actions, but positively, to then positively choose that they want organic food, that they want untainted food, and the difference in taste and the difference that does to your life. That they want to have small schools where children want to go there, but the schools are open access right throughout the year. Depending on the age that people are, people can go into the schools and have the education that they feel they deserve and that they'll be supported to doing. I think it'll be a great world. I think it would be a lovely world. I think it'd be a world where there wouldn't be fear, where there wouldn't be poverty, where there wouldn't be a sense of unease at what we're doing to ourselves and the world around us, that there wouldn't be a sense of isolation, that people wouldn't die of hypothermia in Britain in the winter. A bizarre situation where in Sweden people don't die of hypothermia and its average temperatures are damn sight colder than here. What we would try to do is create a world where we felt at one with each other and the world around us. And as I said, I think it would be a beautiful world. I'd like to be part of that, and I'm certainly working very hard to make it that way.
Thank you very much. Could you give an example of how free market policies have damaged the environment?
The difficulty is to choose one from the million. I mean, there are so many examples of where free market economics has been brought to bear, so-called free market economics, has been brought to bear and has destroyed the world around it. There are examples throughout the world. Let's think of something like the Amazonian basin. That's a classic example that's being taken at the moment, and in 1992 that will be a focus of a huge world conference under the auspices of the United Nations in Brazil. And people will try, I hope, to address these broader issues. But for example, untrammeled activity has allowed people to chop down huge expanses of the Amazonian rainforest so that people get cheap beef, so that people get cheap chipboard, so that people get cheap pulp products. And what have we destroyed in the process? The long-term costs of that are unbelievable and are not brought into the process. That's one little example. One huge example, but a small of the many examples. It's one example. I suppose where we're standing at the moment, we're actually standing in a part of North London called Hackney, called Stoke Newington, in fact, a small division of that. And we're on, at the moment, a 19-acre site of filter beds, where, if Thames Water gets its way, it will be covered with 6-storey, indeed at one point up to 8-storey blocks of flats, completely killing off what is an architecturally and spatially unique area for this part of London. Behind us we have what is part of a 93-acre site of open reservoirs again quite unique, were built in the 1850s as a part of the problem of the huge cholera epidemics that took place in London at the time. And they are at what is now the end of the New River, which is a beautiful tract of waterway that comes in from Hertfordshire into central London, built in the 1600s. All of this, I'm afraid, is up for grabs, that if Thames Water gets its way, it as well will create some huge housing complex behind us, with no access to people who live here. And remember, we're talking from an area that has some of the highest density population and the largest pockets of adult unemployment in the whole of the country, let alone in the whole of London. So that's an example where, if, quotes, free market economics gets its way, local people will suffer and the environment will suffer. And I suppose the best example that is focusing British attention at the moment is the roads and the Channel Tunnel. Britain's roads are priced at the idea that central government pays for them and people use them simply for the cost of their petrol and their road tax licence. It's bizarre that the rail company, British Rail in this case, is expected to pay a full economic cost for its railway, whereas the driver in no way pays a full economic cost. But this is free market economics. The government is saying, we want to have the roads, therefore cars can use them. It's bizarre. So those three examples show how free market, firstly, the free market isn't a free market, and secondly, how it will absolutely destroy the environment around us unless we stand up to be counted and make very important decisions about true economic costs and letting people have the decision-making process, not some centralized bureaucratic process.
Okay, great. Actually, can I just ask another couple which
yeah,
are
no
actually
problem.
on the list?
No
Okay, how do you account for the increased resurgence of free market ideas in recent years?
I'm not actually sure if there has been a resurgence of free market ideas. What there has been is a belief in the myth. Now, if we take, say, East Germany as an example, at the time, and I was very much pleased to be a part of some of the changes that took place in green economics in Germany, at the time of the fall of the wall and things like that, the East Germans believed that there was some sort of nirvana on the other side of this wall. That by simply taking it down, they were going to have all of these wonderful things that they saw that the East Germans had. They didn't. They haven't had it. And what's happened is now people are beginning to question, honestly, whether this was the right decision. What's happened in the process, I'm afraid, is that the right wing has gained some sort of ascendance, and now we're getting a growth of neo-fascism and neo-Nazism in Germany, blaming foreigners for the problem. That, you know, Germany for the Germans and things like that is raising its head again, and rather it's a rather ugly head. They're blaming the economic ills that they're now experiencing on another outside force, be it the Gastarbeiter or whoever. It shows there that their belief in free market economics is a shaky belief. I fear that we're going to get the same thing in Russia as the Russian state moves and tries to create this free market economics. They will see it's not a free market, that everything is stacked in favour of the West. Because they're there already. They've got clout. They've got access to the processes, the decision-making processes, the money brokering processes. They've got access to that. It isn't a free market. And so, again, I fear we're going to get terrible, terrible problems. What they get as well is a myth of somehow this is a more democratic way of doing things. Well, of course, it's no more democratic to allow somebody to die on the street than it is to not allow them to have a vote. We must create a situation where people see that there's a link between the two, that the way people vote actually affects the economics that they're going to get. And that's, for example, why there is a Green Party, not just in this country, but in just about every country in the world now, to give people that valid alternative to realise that the two things are linked, that the decision you make as to who represents you in your parliament, however that be, is directly linked to the policies that they will try to put in. And so what we see is that when people aspire to some, dare I say, right-wing ideal of free market, of open democracy, and they vote those people in, the reality is that it isn't true, that it is not an open democracy, that it is not a free market, that people don't have access to these dreams and beliefs in reality that they thought they were going to get. The Green Party is there to make those links, to make people realise that that's the way we should go. And let's say it, I mean, I've laced my discussion, my chat, with references to the right wing. We also say the same about the left wing, that in fact we actually don't see it as a straight line of left wing and right wing. We actually see it very much as a circle, that the more left you go, the more right you go, the methods that they then begin to adopt become closer and closer and closer. So we're saying as well that extreme left wing regimes are equally a problem in terms of trying to say we know what's best for you. We don't want that situation of saying, just shut up and carry on, we know what's best for you. We want to empower people to make the decisions themselves. And I guess from time to time that means there's going to be some mistakes made. Yes, it's what price democracy argument. People have to make their peace slowly with the world around them. But we want it to be within the constraints of a green economy. And we feel eventually what will come through that pain is a much more effective world, a much safer world. So I don't see that there's been a resurgence, to come right back to the point, of free market ideas. There's been a resurgence of the dream, of the myth. We need all of us to work together to expose that myth and make people realise that there are other choices they can make. It's not just left or right. It's, dare I suggest, green at the heart of politics. Not left, not right, but at the heart of politics. That's what the Green Party's about.
Okay, that's great.
If you've got any other odd things you want to talk about and ask, even quite difficult stuff, hairy stuff, then ask it, and if I can answer it, I will try.
No, I'm just trying to think how we're going to. Obviously, I'm sort of putting questions, as it were. The answer then we can fit in specific areas in the program.
Sure. Can I stretch just for a second?
Please do.
Thanks. Right. Go on. You happy now? Happy with where I am and how I am?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. As a national speaker for the Green Party, I am called upon to do talks in all sorts of places, all sorts of ways. The National Association of Conservative Graduates, for example, was a recent place, and you can imagine you wouldn't necessarily get a great deal of support from the National Association of Conservative Graduates if you're a Green speaker. I have often been called upon to try to address this idea of what is wrong with your approach, oh believer in the free market, and oh you believer in traditional economics. And I'm finding it less and less of a problem to refute it now. That at last, more and more people are actually beginning to realise that the things that the Green Party and others were talking about since 1973 and before are actually happening now. The problems we talked about are happening now. They have accepted that there is this dilemma of pollution in the world. They have accepted there is this dilemma of that people do not have enough and others have too much. They have accepted this idea that our trading processes are clearly wrong, something's going wrong. So they've accepted, as I would suggest, the description of the problem. What they've not done is accepted the prescription for the solutions. And that's where the Green Party comes in, and this is where we have lots of our discussions now. And it's a welcome change, mind. At first they wouldn't even listen to the problems. Now they've listened to them, they've accepted them. They now not yet come to the solutions, and I would suggest that they're going to do that fairly soon. My major problems are with people who think that you can use free market processes to resolve the problems that they say that they accept have happened. So they'll say that, for example, we can allow the free market to solve pollution. Well, the answer back to that is the pollution problems were caused by this so-called free market in the first place. How can you now use the free market to do it? You have to start using tax and fiscal measures to say the polluter will pay. And even in this country, the Conservative Party has actually notionally accepted this idea of the polluter pays. What they've not done is how much he or she will pay, and what they'll pay, and what the effect of that is on the world around them. They haven't accepted that yet, but they've moved in that direction. The Labour Party has accepted it, but will not still accept the concept that part of the problem is untramelled economic growth. They still seem to think that you can grow yourselves out of the problem. Well, hang on, if they've accepted that there are these resources becoming less and less and less in the world around us, how can you consume more and more and more to resolve the problem? You can't. You have to start doing things like creating a nil external growth economy. Now, people, for example, used to throw at us that we were a no-growth party. That's not true. What we are is a nil external growth party. And let me explain what I mean by that. Under a green economics system, or indeed under a green government, there would be massive areas of growth in the economy. Insulation, appropriate energy sources, appropriate public transport initiatives, infrastructure development, all of that would go ahead at a rate of knots. There would be no producing yet another plastic widget for somebody to buy that they just don't need. They wouldn't be producing stuff that could not be recycled or reused, more accurately reused and then recycled. There would not be nuclear power and the vast amounts of money that has been spent on that. There would not be the armed nuclear forces, and indeed there would be nothing like the defence forces we have now, because in the main they're not defence, they are offence, and we would go back to true defence forces and things like that. And that generates a massive amount of money that you recycle back into the economy. I put those arguments to people to point out that if they suggest that you can grow yourself out of it, you can use the free market to do it, or you can use some sort of mix of the two, which is where the Liberal Party, the Liberal Democrats have centred themselves, they don't work. They don't work because they are built on sand. What you need to do is to go back into the basics of the fundamentals of the problems and address those fundamental causes. When you do that, you begin to realise that all this other stuff basically is tinkering with it. What they're doing, what the standard traditional economists are doing, is that they are rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's great fun, they can look nice, they can sit there looking good, but they're still heading towards the iceberg. And for many of them, they still only see the tip of the iceberg. What the Green Party has done is seen the whole of the iceberg and said, look, let's actually think about changing direction, turning a bit. And that's what we're going to do. And that's how, mainly, I've actually begun to gain converts, and indeed as every other Green speaker has done, when he or she goes out to talk to people where they're at, be it on the doorstep knocking, or if it's in front of Central Hall, Westminster, that they've begun to realise that green economics is the economics of common sense, and that green politics is increasingly the politics of common sense. If we want a sane world, we have to have sane politics, and that's what the Greens are about.
Okay, that's great. I think that virtually covers it. I can't think of anything on top of my head.
I mean, as a libertarian organisation, I know very little about you other than the bits of paper that we've sent. So obviously I don't know where you come from, I don't know what your backgrounds are or anything. But my guess is that you would have some interest in, for example, what's the difference between being left and being green? What's the difference between environmentalism and being green? For example, are there black people in the Green Party? Where do we address our issues of racism and things like that? I mean, I don't really want to get into hairy, difficult stuff like that.
Hold on a second. Actually, there is one question, before we go on to those things. Perhaps we can discuss that in a minute. There is one thing I was going to ask are we still rolling?
Yes.
Okay. What would you say in response to those economists and others who argue that in practice there are no limitations on resources, and in practice you could in fact expand, for example, into space or things like that?
Well, people who suggest that there are no limits to the resources of the world are, to be honest, living in cloud cuckoo land, and increasingly people are accepting, that is, the person in the street is appreciating that there are limits to growth. I mean, that's the wonderful title of the very important report that generated a lot of the Green movement. What we argue about is to say, look around you. Look at the fact that we, as in Britain, have wasted North Sea oil to prop up unemployment and a bizarre economic structure in Britain, whereas Norway at least tried to do something about recycling it into its own economy. That look at the fact that we're going to run out of, would you believe, uranium, a limited resource. We're running out of coal. We're running out of quite serious, fundamental parts of the current industrial processes and industrial system. And so people say, I don't know, well, why don't you just therefore invest in the limitless area of human expertise, which I accept is limitless, boundless, and, I don't know, disappear off to Mars, mine Mars and bring the stuff back. Well, you ask yourself, well, I suppose that could be possible. If you pump thousands of billions of pounds, of ECUs, of dollars, whatever you want to call it, into some sort of space process, well, maybe you could do it. What you do in the process, I don't know, in terms of the poverty that you generate and the scarce resources. What we suggest is you don't need to. There is no need to pretend that you can just carry on polluting the world and go on. With a green economic structure, you can improve every single person's quality of life. Not overnight, but over a period of time. And live within our resources. We don't need to carry on belching out smoke into the atmosphere. We can stop that. We don't need to be stuck in a traffic jam on the M25 right round it, day in, day out. We can stop that by going down a green road. So when people say, oh, well, we can carry on, we ask them, well, why would you want to? Just because a few people can go around in very fancy cars, smoking very big cigars, just because a few people can have access to untrammeled leisure? No. We want to have everybody to have access to it. And, as I said, you don't need to carry on doing that. Okay, I accept that under a green economic structure, some people are going to suffer. People in the city that play silly fools with money moving them around, or even not even money now, with electronic transfers moving things around at vast incomes, for sure they're going to suffer. They're not going to get the incomes that they've been generating at the moment. In the main, what they will get, though, for example, is clearer air to breathe, that they'll be able to enjoy what money they do have in a much more effective way than if they carried on doing what they're doing and killing themselves and killing us in the process.
Okay, that's great. Just one more thing, perhaps, if you, again, just thinking about what I'm just thinking about.
Let me just remind you of my time scale. I would like to leave here sometime just after 1:30, if that's possible. We've got about another 20 minutes.
Should we just ask one final question?
Well, you can ask as many questions as you like, but that's the sort of time
gotcha.
scale.
And then we'll probably just take 5 or 10 minutes just to have you walk around. Just
No problem.
Shots,
No problem. No problem.
Okay. What would be your opinion of perhaps the more extreme classical liberals or libertarians who would argue, for instance, for privatised roads, privatised waterways as a way of ensuring that costs are in fact borne by the consumers of these items?
Well, one of the problems of anybody that suggests that what you should have is a totally libertarian approach to anything in the true sense of no controls, no access, no controls, no process whereby you stop people doing anything, is that all you do is you put power into the hands of fewer and fewer people. Because let's take, for example, the idea of having a totally private road system. The only people who could use that are people who could pay in pounds and pence to use it. The cost that they would pay, though, would not be the full cost. Where is the opportunity cost of the lost opportunities for people who can't use it? Where is the cost of the pollution of that vehicle using it? Where is the cost of lost production of the land that road will cover? Where is the cost of the opportunity cost of a rail network that would have gone down that route and allowed much less of an impact on the environment? What we therefore show is that argument exposes this myth of a free market. There isn't such a thing. That what you get is more and more people, and rather less and less people able to use more and more things. What you get is more and more people not able to use those things that are available. So the argument itself is just fundamentally flawed. And although there are certain people, for example, I shared a platform recently with a professor from LSE who was advocating totally libertarian approaches to economics. It was put as a vote to, this House believes that. And in fact, he was voted out of court, that myself and my colleague who were in this particular debate had the floor completely. And even though by training, for example, I am not an economist, although I'm the economic speaker, one of the things what the Green Party did was try to say that maybe what we should have is a way of putting economics across in people terms, not in somewhat arcane standard economics terms. And that's where he lost out too. His ideas on libertarian economics just flew past people completely, and they realised it was a myth. If it had existed ever, it doesn't exist now, and it has no place in the world around us now. It's a different world.
Okay, that's great.
Did that sort of answer the questions you were asking? I mean, I fleshed them out as complete sentences as you suggested.
That's great.
But have I actually answered that? That's slightly unusual. I mean, if you wanted to get that in the background. And it just shows that an area like this does attract them. We've got the swans, of course, you've got the...
Do you want mic?
Is it
you want me on
being
camera,
mic'd or not? It's not being mic'd.
I've got a mic there, yes. That'll pick us up.
You want to? Okay. I mean, what we're doing at the moment is walking around what's this 19 acres of a 93-acre site. And it's set out as a series of filter beds that originate themselves from the 1840s, 1850s. These are unique in the country as a way of giving fresh water to the people of London after the cholera epidemics. But what they also do is that they're acting as magnets for birds and bird life. What you have is a range of ones here, even though this isn't the migration season. What we have is swans over here, we have Canada geese over there, we have tufted ducks, we have ruddy shell ducks, we have a range of different seagulls coming in. And although we can't see them across here now because of the time of year we are, this area is completely covered by martins, swallows and swifts during the summer months as they hawk for flies and everything. Invertebrate life, we have some wonderful insect life here. We have a whole range of different dragonflies. All of this, remember, absolutely smack bang in the middle of Hackney. That this is an area of some of the greatest poverty in the country, let alone in London. And the idea is that suddenly this is going to be built on by Thames Water. It's ridiculous. We wouldn't want to see that. What we also have further over, we're on, as I said already, a 19-acre site. Across the main green lanes here, we have a beautiful, huge pumping station. We have, as we walk down towards it, you can see the pumping station in the background. But what we also have is two very large areas of open water, the so-called East and West Reservoir, that are, again, unique. We are within a few miles of Piccadilly, and we have places where there is no ice whatsoever throughout the whole of the winter. So ice-free water of this size in this part of the world is unique. And so what you get is a massive amount over the winter, the harsh winter months, of some really very important wildlife. That's only the wildlife side of it. What does it do to people who live, as you can probably film in the background, in high-rise blocks of flats all around us? High-rise blocks of flats, and they have a sight of all this beautiful open space. That what they have is a way of seeing a green lung, if that's not a slight contradiction in terms. That the lung itself is important in terms of what it does to the environment, but what does it do to them, to their quality of life? And how would that change if there were thousands of units of flats built on here in the process? And I think this epitomises the difference between how a green legislation would work and how standard economics works. People are costing things just on the basis of the pounds and the pence that they can make, not what it does for the people around them. And this is epitomised in the processes that have gone on to make decisions around on this. The local authority is very for what local people want to do. They've supported this through right from the very beginning, including giving money to make sure that the campaign is a successful campaign to save areas like this. And Thames Water, in this particular case, ignores local people completely. And now, particularly, this was before privatisation, mind, and now post-privatisation, they're even worse. They don't give a toss. They're not interested in what's going on, and this encapsulates the classic problem of, I suppose, libertarian economics, almost. The idea that a PLC can be allowed to get on and do just what it likes without any reference at all to the structure and the context in which it does it. That's the problem. And that's what green economics is about. Drawing those links between people, between companies, between what they do and how they do it. And that's the success, I think. Is they're actually trying to get, what the geese are doing, is they're trying to get parasites off. They're diving underwater. They're not diving geese at all. Geese are not divers. But if you notice, they're actually dunking themselves underwater. It's part of the problem of London birds. They have a lot of parasites. And they're doing that. That's a juvenile group that we're looking at over there. A few large males and a few larger females, but predominantly this year's birds that have come through. The Canada goose is the success story, I think, of bird breeding in London. They were always a rarity when you read bird books of the 1920s, that people crowed that they saw, gosh, I saw a Canada goose. And now they're seen by the million. Cool. It's a great success.
Could you ask David to walk along over towards our left? So he's doing it anyway.
Oh yeah, okay. If you come over here slowly, that's great.
I tell you what, hold your position there. Can you take a step backwards with one foot? Sorry, you're backwards. And now move back again into shot. Yes, so nice. Look a little bit over towards the right, as if there's something over there, that's right. Okay, and now sort of walk off over to your right.